Chapter 10. She never did get any answers as to what happened to her uncle back then, although more recently she'd come to discover, through extended family, he'd slowly gone mad. It's not like I killed the guy. 87 shrugged when asked, unwilling to discuss it further. He'd pulled out her uncle's parasites, devoured them. It was a public service, really, he told himself. Granted, it left the guy a shell of a man, brain riddled with holes he'd come to depend on the parasite to fill. For a time after that, 87 remained quiet, and Grace hid away in oversized jumpers and books, watching the world around her change beyond recognition. The ground outside dried up as dust and windstorms assailed. Plants and animals died as unfiltered air and water became toxic. The hydrodomes were constructing across the globe flew up fast. Everyone helped. They crowned major cities, hundreds of thin blue lines redrawn as Earth's atmosphere continued to weaken. Grace could remember the day alarms began to sound. The sudden decline in atmospheric pressure meant that migration into Hydra had to happen sooner than planned. Now, before it was fully finished, it was chaos. As they neared Hydra, 3D holograms and projections of Velda King could be seen everywhere, replaying her speech in an attempt to dampen rising panic. Welcome to Hydra, a better life, a community built by the people, for the people. Many crowded, queuing at entry points to move in, but a few refused to leave their spacious homes outside Hydra in exchange for the tiny shipping containers on offer in the third. They stayed in what soon resembled dry, dusty ghost towns. Grace had been just 12 years old at the time. Looking about in the chaos as they entered Hydra had been frightening, like watching people swarm rafts on a sinking ship. She gripped hold of Resnick tightly as they made their way to the wall where they accessed platforms to the first. People were crammed in everywhere. Babies were crying, and many seemed panicked. Some lost. Others were angry, raging at guards who denied access to the first. As they'd made their way along the border of the third to their allocated gate, 296, Velda King's holographic message had changed. We're working tirelessly to ensure everyone's safety. Remain with your loved ones. Her ghostly monologue echoed above the hubbub. Appeals regarding accommodation will be processed in due course. Lack of criminal convictions are imperative. People seemed scared, and, in truth, the third frightened her. Wide-eyed, Grace stood in the long queue that approached the wall and the formidable security guards at the border to the first. They stood like gladiators, dressed in black Kevlar, chiseled body armor with weapons strapped to their back and sides. All looked the same, menacing, intimidating, all manning checkpoints, except one who moved between them, appearing to hand out orders. She couldn't see his face behind the angular cast helmet, but his voice, the sound of it, changed everything. Like a switch, waves of anxiety that crashed about inside of her as they were jostled in the crowds stilled. There was something so familiar, his movement, his tone. Although his back was to her, he seemed to notice something as well and stilled before his angular mask bore down on them from the gate. The guard beside him continued processing their citizen passports and scanned their hands before studying the papers her father held out, finally waving them through. All the while, Grace found she couldn't take her eyes off him. She waited for him to speak, to place the voice. Wanted so badly to see the face behind that mask, but he didn't. Her distraction with the guard meant that she didn't notice the first until she was fully out of the station. It was breathtaking. No dust, no dirt. Fresh air and little brooks meandering through the city landscape. Speechless, she removed her mask. There was even grass, though no larger plants, not yet anyway. Only projections, holographs of them. Still, compared to how they'd been living, this was unbelievable, so different to Sector 3's crowds and commotion, or outside where dust storms assailed from all sides. Thank goodness Dad won the tender with Inter. Without it, they wouldn't have been able to secure a place here. But even in that relief, her heart sank. Grant had refused to come. She wouldn't leave her friends in the third, though Grace knew it was more than that. She and Mum never really saw eye to eye. They'd said their goodbyes in the third. I've been through far worse, she'd said as they'd left her to settle into her small shipping container. By nightfall, Hydra was sealed off, and those that hadn't sought refuge died within weeks. But looking back, it hadn't taken long for the safety and comfort of Hydra to be forgotten. Cramped and often unkempt living conditions, in the third especially, saw to that. Those that lived there still had to wear masks outdoors and struggled to afford the cost of fresh air and water that was pumped into homes, while the first was sectioned off with privately policed checkpoints. To enter from the third, you had to have a digital resident ID or work permit. Some years later, Grace plucked that same presence, 87, out of her mind as she slept. This time it seemed to be wandering about in search of something. The archetypal form spun to eye her, happy to deviate from whatever it was that occupied him. You think it's never looked so bad? This rock and its protective ring that facilitates engagement with the divine? Everyone thinks so. Then they must be right, he scoffed, pulling back the curtain in her dream. Looks like hell to me. Grace gaped at the scene they'd fallen into. He wasn't wrong. In the beginning, Earth looked a frightening and hellish place, worse than outside of Hydra. It was spooky and desolate. No ocean, no life, like some parallel world. The only water, a steamy haze, making it near impossible to breathe or see much. But as he pulled them forward and things cooled, water condensed to form oceans. Perspective is everything. 87 pulled her through centuries that followed. Land rose out of water in magnificent explosions of fire, volcanic fireworks crafting and carving the landscape. Zooming down to a microscopic level, she watched cyanobacteria adapt and photosynthesis create atmosphere, and with it an icy desert, a snowball of Earth. Gliding through hundreds of millions of years, 87 gestured to the great dying that followed. Millions of years passed in what felt to be the turn of a page, and they watched mountains move as Pangea broke apart and they swam with Leviathan. Falling through the next page as though a wave, millions of years more rolled overhead until fire fell from heaven, extinguishing the sun for a time. But as the dust settled, people emerged. Grace marveled at the very first lifeline on the living tapestry they explored. Did you know the first computer was a loom? 87 mused, watching Grace study this fine vibrating string. It wasn't how she'd have imagined things. The first lifeline didn't gradually develop, but rather suddenly appeared. A second branching directly from it, and from there, all future lifelines came. It doesn't make sense. It's more like magic. Disappointment laced her expression. There were no answers here, only her daydreams and silly musings. They say great science is indistinguishable from magic. Or fiction. Creation takes time. Only for those within it. 87 smiled. You lot never ask the important questions. Her lips firmed, attention fixed at its starting point, the point of origin. What was she missing? Things can't just appear suddenly, arrive out of nothing. It goes against everything we know. That depends. On what? On how much you know. He laughed. And your perspective. Whether you are observing things from inside creation or from outside of it. Think of a computer program. Fossil records show time and time again that species come into existence very suddenly. Do you know what we don't find in those records? He smiled down at her. Evolution. Grace laughed, but to her dismay, he looked sincere. We share 99.7% of our DNA with Neanderthals, she offered as proof. Bonobos and chimpanzees share 99.7% of their DNA, yet they, like us, are a distinctly separate species. We can see how things adapt over time. Adaptation within a group is not the same as evolving from one species to another. His head cocked aside where he seemed to study her reaction. Don't you ever wonder if someone swapped your great fiction with nonfiction and vice versa? Why on earth would they? She felt exasperation escape. Oh, I don't know. Boredom. To see if you would notice. To challenge you. Dare you to think. Or simply make you a little more cautious over what you accept in blind faith. He strolled on. Tell me, if you were to code a computer program to create a world, design and upload its inhabitants, would the first not seem to appear instantly? Even if you'd spent an immeasurable amount of time outside the program, designing and building? Is their nature pre-coded? With potential, his mouth twisted patronizingly. People are human to a greater or lesser extent. Coded with potential, biological problem-solving machines? He paused with a wicked grin. Inferior problem-solving machines, but precious in that they act as transistors between physical and metaphysical worlds. They're autonomous, Some healthy, some not. Some riddled with parasites that drive inhumane behavior, while others battle one virus or another, temporarily impairing function. As he moved them on, they explored through Africa, ancient Mesopotamia, and on into Egypt, where they watched the great Ramses II laid to rest among his treasure. Like a child surrounded by pretty plastic toys, don't you think? His face shone with mock amusement. Hardly plastic, she breathed, trying to take it all in. Shiny rocks and trinkets might as well be for all their use in a metaphysical world. From that night she dreamt of him often, and they spoke at length long after she dozed off. Not in any audible voice, but in thought. Far more efficient, 87 explained. And there he began revealing insights and ideas, answering her many questions at length. In Alexandria they visited Euclid, his straight lines and triangles. Laws of nature are but the mathematical thoughts of God, 87 uttered, as though the great man himself, who'd collated this treasure of the mind. It's just like the tribal dances, Grace marveled, recalling their time in Africa. The shapes tribe members would move in as a sound began to propagate, the beat and tone shifting them to different formational patterns using straight lines, circles, and Euclid's fifth postulate snapped to mind. We're the triangular, part of the fundamental, its representation of sorts, interconnected with it. Made in my image, 3 in 1, the notion surfaced of its own. She watched 3 threads that made up each lifeline take shape in various dimensions. Together we form a sort of net, a living tapestry, 87 corrected. Grace felt her hand trace the curves of space and time with fascination, watching them move and react like strings on a harp. No matter how small or large, these 3 strands of a lifeline stretched out. They never seemed to take up any more space than the others in this strange and beautiful archive. She mapped the living tapestry, its infinite complexity as best she could, but it was as inexhaustible as it was confusing. This 4-dimensional masterpiece. Moving up led you down. Being first made you last. It was in this strange kingdom that she watched this net of triangles, non-right triangles, each covering 180 degrees of perspective, each missing its other half, each connecting across multiple dimensions to its surrounding neighbor with a cross that maintained connection. Without that cross, the net breaks. The lines, and she studied them, they're able to extend infinitely. Not all do, not all link up to that cross stitch, the grid-based design linking the physical and metaphysical realms. But from there he moved on, asking a great many questions about her. I'm not so special, she offered with a flattered smile. If what you say is true, you must have explored countless lifelines, got to know others like me. We explore things we deem interesting, useful. Your kind are weak, naive at best, he drawled, seemingly oblivious to the fact he'd knocked the wind out of her. Then why spend time with me? Pity. Brilliant green eyes flashed back at him. I think it's more than that, she added with a wistful nod. You need help, I give it. Plenty of others in worse situations, I'll bet. She shrugged with a knowing smile. Yet none so incapable of handling them. But Grace happily dismissed the idea. I think you like our chats. I like to win, and with me you can't. No, I think you enjoy being around someone different. It had occurred to her that despite his access to infinite information, he could only learn from what he registered. He certainly existed in something of a bubble given his narrow perspective. Even using Mobius, you still need someone with a different perspective, like a mirror to cover your blind spots. She shrugged with a smile. 87 went rigid, the very idea revolting. Blind spots? Me? I think you find this refreshing. She smiled, swinging back in the hammock of Mobius. Refreshing and exhausting are not the same thing. It wasn't long before her clumsy chain of thought broke the silence that followed, only carving a deeper furrow to his brow. What's that? 87 snapped, eyes glittering dangerously. Nothing. Grace dismissed the thought at once, having felt those laser eyes lock on as though preparing to return fire. But he clearly knew exactly what she'd been thinking, and after several long, uncomfortable moments, Grace figured she might as well just come out with it. It's just that it's a rather peculiar name, don't you think? 87? A unique name. But that's just it. It's not a name. Yes, it is. It's ordinal. A number, she tried to explain, What's it meant to? He glared at where her thoughts manifested. Better than generic. How many others have your name? He snapped. And they chose to call you Grace. What's that? Irony. All I meant is, why? Are there more of you? How many? But he didn't answer. Instead, resentment seethed from where he floated. Sorry, I didn't. Well, she shrugged, knowing she'd upset him. I just wanted to know where you came from. If there are more of you, if you have parents, how you found me. She rattled on a little uncomfortably. Since she could remember, Grace had a feeling of not belonging, and 87, although rude and a little arrogant at times, made her feel safe and strangely at home. But he was now looking at her as though she'd been scraped off the bottom of his shoe. See, she suspected her ego would shape him like her. But he was so different, so unique, she didn't know anyone like him. If he was in fact real, she hated the idea that he was somewhere equally unhappy, or worse given his name, or lack of one. Told you, I have a name. Despite her curiosity, she knew better than to pry further.